Joining me now on the Knicks Film School podcast, if you are a person who follows the NBA, it doesn't matter what team you follow, the Knicks or otherwise, you have probably heard this person. You have probably seen this person on Twitter because he is all over the place. He has very good takes. Some are hot, but I love it because his hot takes are like, you know what? That's a hot take, but I can get down with that. I feel where he's coming from. He's the host of the Chase Down Pod, another pod here on the Blue Wire Pod Network. Justin Rowan. Justin, thank you for joining me, my man.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the intro. I'm flattered. I hope not that many people know who I am because being exposed to what I bring to the table is just, that's not something I wish on too many people, especially strangers. But I'm happy to be here. I'm excited.
Why wouldn't you want to be exposed? Exposure is a wonderful thing. So let's start here. If you would have told me, I guess 5 weeks ago, 5.5, whatever it is, that you would be doing a pod in which you and a Cavs podcast host were talking about the scintillating game that was on the schedule between the New York Knickerbockers and the Cleveland Cavaliers. And so I know what my reaction would have been if someone had told that to me. What would your reaction have been?
Well, you know what? I would have some disbelief, but going into this season, obviously there was some understanding that there was going to be weirdness with COVID and whatnot. My gut reaction to that would be, okay, well, sounds like I was right about the Cavs young guys, and they got off to a good start, capitalized on some of these easy games. And my large adult son, Rowan Barrett Jr., is killing it for the New York Knicks, which, you know what? Not too far from the truth. So I'm happy that this is a meaningful game because this is actually like 6 and 8 seed, right? Cavs and Knicks. This is going to matter for standings and whatnot. And it's a good step in the right direction for both franchises.
Well, that's actually a good place to start because unless I missed something, it was just us and you guys for that Vegas put at the good old 22.5 number before the season. I don't think anyone else was quite that low. I know at least here, there are still a lot of fans who are, I'm not going to say upset about what's happening, but like they were all in on the, I don't know what your terminology is. I prefer fade for Cade. Mm-hmm. That brigade. Is the opinion in Cleveland like this is a good thing? Let's just win some games and we'll figure out the rest later. Or are there any people who are like, this is too much, too fast or something?
I think there's a healthy mix, and I think the Cavs and Knicks are in a very similar spot. I think both teams are benefiting from an improvement on the coaching front. I think both teams are well prepared in comparison to last season. And when you are well prepared, you're going out there and you're battling and you're playing hard. You're going to take advantage of a lot of these teams, especially those that aren't necessarily in full gear. My thoughts going into this season, especially looking at the schedule early on, was that the Cavs were going to start hot and that come February, things would kind of start to fall apart. You look at the schedule and it's basically like Clippers, Bucks, Clippers again. Like it's just a brutal 3-week stretch. And I think both teams are still at a point where they're really heavily reliant on the young guys to go out there and initiate the offense to close games. And whenever that's the case, I think you're going to get enough losses organically. I don't necessarily foresee both of these teams being in the playoff picture long term this season. But with the new lottery odds, and you guys are very familiar with it, with the way that the Knicks have dropped, like your best route when it comes to team building, I think, is just focusing on internal development, trying to get accountability, because the odds are so flat that you basically have the same chance of jumping up there. And if you're the 6th or 7th best lottery odds, your chances of being in the top 4 isn't that different than if you completely disregarded your team's development and just focused on draft lottery odds. And Look at the teams that went far in the playoffs last year. Like, it was all internal development, not necessarily high picks. So just focus on what you can control. And I think both teams are going in the right direction when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I'm curious to get one more of your takes on this, because I know for me, I go I think about this partially as like, as you said, a development thing, right? Like we have to see progress from the young players. And if that progress nets an extra win or two, then so be it. But there's another part of me that, and maybe just because we've had a certain organizational stink on us for most of the last 20 years, that just feels like get some good press. Like, it's like, I know the players might not necessarily read it, but there is like you get a vibe around the team. And I just felt like we needed to get away from the, my go-to was like the jump, right? Like what are they saying today about, what's the LOL Knicks line today? Do you feel like for the Cavs, it's like more of one, more of the other, a mix of both, or what's important to you for this season for them?
Yeah, I mean, what I wanted out of this season, my goal. So I predicted 27 wins for the Cavs. I still feel pretty good about that number. In all likelihood, Andre Drummond's going to be moved at some point in the next month or two. And while that's a good long-term move, that's going to set them back a little bit. Showing some strength, showing some sort of this is what the Cavs are, displaying an identity, having accountability without LeBron James is one of the most important things that this franchise can do. And I think the Knicks are in a similar position where, I mean, look at the market, right? Like the amount of times that it's been, free agents are going to go to the Knicks or whatever the case may be. I mean, I
could recall a couple of those. I
times. I still am of the belief that, based on what I heard and just kind of my gut feeling that if KD doesn't get hurt and Kyrie and KD are ready to go year one, that they would end up in the Knicks with the Knicks. But like the Knicks have an advantage over the Cavs, which is if you do display that stability, that you're actually a well-run organization, I think that's going to attract players. Like I think that they can actually be a player in the free agent market, whereas the Cavs, you just got to focus on developing guys. And then if you develop enough players, you can identify a core, you can consolidate some of that assets and pull a Toronto where you're trading for a disgruntled star and cashing in on some of those guys you developed. Like, even though both teams are operating at a different level when it comes to what advantages they have in that market, I still think trying to do things the right way, be properly coached, hold players accountable, make guys earn minutes. I think that's just a really healthy approach to basketball in today's NBA.
I completely agree. To me, it's kind of obvious when you look at the teams that do well. I wonder how much, not to get off on a tangent, but I wonder how much the Sixers tanking and then getting those guys influenced the discourse, and maybe specifically the Twitter discourse for a couple of years. I feel like that was a lot of people's go-tos for like, well, of course tanking works, stupid. Look at what the Sixers did. And I guess that story has yet to be written in terms of an ending, but I don't know. I agree with you.
Look at like the final 8 of last year's playoffs. Like that was one thing that we did because we run a Cavs podcast and there was 9 months off. We had to find things to talk about, and we talked about what lessons you could take from a team building standpoint with the final 8. Denver, Utah, Miami, all these teams, they built organically. They didn't have top 10 picks. They just focus on player development. They're always competitive. They're always up there. They're able to cash in. Like, look at Denver. They're in a prime position to trade for Bradley Beal now and maybe take that next leap as a team. Utah has done such a great job. Like,
you took the words out of my mouth with Utah. Go kicking the crap out of Dallas without Donovan Mitchell. Haven't had a top 10 pick since Dante Exum, I think. Yeah.
Like, what team that's tanked has got to the conference finals as a result of the players they got? Like, yeah, the Cavs tanked, but the reason they were good, like, yes, it got them Kyrie, but LeBron coming back and all the assets to trade for Kevin Love, like, that's why they got there. It's basically like OKC, and outside of that, it's all been player development. Golden State's a prime example of that as well. So Milwaukee's a fantastic example. Yeah. I mean, obviously they hit a home run with Giannis, but look what they turned Chris Middleton into. Like, look what they've managed to do with their supporting cast. It's got Toronto was another great example. Like, none of these teams really had high lottery picks. And I think in today's NBA, you look at the draft, there are good players. Like, the guys that go like from 15 to 25 might have been fringe lottery picks before. There's so much talent and so much depth coming into the league that I think you can just focus on figuring out how good your team currently is and develop whatever players you get. If you get lottery luck, you do. If you don't, make the most of the guy you pick.
Yeah, and I feel like that's an interesting. So there's so many places I want to go because you brought a couple of things that I want to hit on. Let's stick with that for a second because you mentioned young core, right? And I almost am curious from your perspective as because I think most NBA, maybe casual fans, maybe even people who cover the sport for a living, would look at the Cavs young core and would look at the Knicks young core and say, they're maybe not even, but for me at least, I don't see a massive difference between the two. I would personally give the edge to you guys because I think Sexton has the highest ceiling, and I'm leaving. Let's leave Julius Randle and Andre Drummond out of this conversation for the moment. But so the guys on rookie contracts, I guess, as it were. I see Sexton as having the highest ceiling of any of them, but I guess, are you a fan of RJ enough to put him ahead of Colin? I'm curious where your take is on this.
Yeah, I mean, I was incredibly high on RJ coming into the draft. Last year hurt a little bit, but at the same time, the Knicks just didn't have spacing, and he's a slasher. These guys need time. And Darius Garland, it's been the same thing. I actually think Garland has the highest ceiling out of any of the Cavs young guys.
Really? More than Sexton?
Yeah. I think Sexton certainly has the highest floor. He's playing like an all-star right now. He's going to be that. And with his work ethic, I'm very open to changing my opinion on that. But Garland was supposed to be in that RJ Barrett, Ja Morant tier, and last year was just not healthy. And now we're seeing the flashes as a starter. He's averaging 17-7 really efficiently, making next level passes. And I just think those live dribble shooters that can create for other guys at a high level are incredibly valuable in today's NBA. But RJ Barrett, I still believe in his star potential. A lot of these guys develop at different paces. Look at Dame Lillard. It took him 4 years in college, and being drafted to a really good team, but it took him a long time before he was prepared. And I think so much of this, we used to basically your rookie contract. It's just about, we're going to pump these guys up. What do they do well? What's the great stories with them? Now, we're having conversations about year 1 and 2 guys. Do they play a winning style basketball? Can you win with Trae Young and stuff like that? We are rushing to these second contract conversations, whereas we should just be focusing on, okay, what are kind of the high water marks in their performances? What are the flashes that they're bringing to the table? How much growth have they had? And I just think we are skipping steps often in the coverage.
I mean, You're talking to someone who has had Knick fans seek me out over the last week or two, being like, Obi Toppin's a bust. We blew it. We screwed up. And look, he may be. Who knows what's going to happen? But kids played 10 games, I think, 7, 8, whatever. I completely agree with you. So 2 guys I want to hear your opinion on, one for the Knicks and one for the Cavs. Isaac Okoro ended up 3rd, I think, on my board, my final draft pick, that means anything. Yeah. Everybody and their mother is a draft pick board. He was 3rd on mine. I was really impressed by the person, and I thought the game would translate. And then the other guy, I'm curious what your view on in terms of where you see him as a valuable asset, because he did have one very good game against you guys, is Emmanuel Quickly. So whichever order you want to go in.
Yeah, so Okoro, he had moved up to, I think, 2nd on my board. I really liked Okongwu. I'm still a huge believer in him. I think Atlanta did a great job there. But Okoro, hearing the work ethic with him is just one of the biggest things, because part of the Cavs drafting philosophy under Kobe Altman has been, they've been getting guys from Team USA. Garland, Sexton, Okoro, even Jared Allen were standouts there. Yeah. And Altman's been very involved with Team USA. So what they are getting are these high upside or high work ethic guys, high character guys. It certainly helps that they already have relationships, like Okoro and Sexton are friends. Garland and Kevin Porter Jr., who's no longer on the team, they were friends. But these guys don't have to leave to go team up with their buddies if they ever become good. But with Okoro, already the best perimeter defender on the Cavs, just really, really blowing me away on that end of the floor. The offense is going to take some time, but I think the jumper mechanics are better than when he was in college. The Cavs have had success developing jump shots with Larry Nance Jr., Jetty Osman couldn't shoot. Even Tristan Thompson was hitting threes. Colin Sexton couldn't shoot. and he's at like 45% over his last 30 games and 40% for his career. Like, this player development staff is a group that I believe in. So I'm high on him. Like, I don't necessarily see all-star upside, but I do see like maybe first team all defense. Like, I think this guy can really, really make an impact, and Quickly's really impressed me. Like, oh my God. Like,
these are the reactions I wanted from you.
Yeah. Like another Kentucky guy that just is thriving with the NBA spacing. Like, even though the Knicks spacing isn't ideal, it's better. I think
it's better when he's out there.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the benefits to what the Knicks are doing, like having accountability, being well coached, playing hard, is you get minutes that are more valuable when it comes to player development. When you're down 20 every single night, when you're looking at the film and you're saying, well, I blew that defensive assignment. Well, when we're better and we're trying harder and the games are closer, I'm going to try. No, when you're actually trying every single possession, you have more usable game film. You have more things to go off of. I think that's part of why Kevin Knox is playing a little better this year too, because he understands what his responsibilities are supposed to be. Still inconsistent, but I think you're getting more usable.
It's a step
game
up.
Film. Yeah,
he's an NBA player most nights.
Yeah,
which was great.
Wasn't really the case before. But Quickly is just one of those guys that like you can tell right away. All right, he's got something. He stands out. You notice him on the floor, and that's one of the biggest things, especially for a young player. If he's out there, he's assertive, and you notice him and that he's doing good things and multiple good things. That's just a great sign, and it's huge for their rebuild.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, obviously in New York, we tend to get excited when we have good young players. So there's a line of people just waiting to build the statue to Emmanuel quickly. I'm at the front.
Ready
of that
to build
line.
it quickly? Would you say?
Oh, I think we might. You're a podcast host. You brought up the name of Mr. Andre Drummond. Boy, is there a more fascinating, I don't want to say player because it's like we know what Andre Drummond is, but like just situation, because you got, so expiring $28 million, not nothing in a league where our owners hemorrhaging money. We don't really know. Maybe whatever. Is he going to be an all-star? I mean, he has to be in the conversation, right? Doesn't he?
He might be. I mean, especially if the Cavs stay up there.
Maybe just because he's put up 25 and 20 in 2 games against us.
And he's been a big part of them having a top 10 defense this year. They went from the worst defense in history to a top 10 defense. And he and Larry Nance Jr. are the biggest parts of that so far this season. I mean, obviously there's been internal growth, adding Okoro, adding wings that can play, all like that all helps. But I mean, defense in the NBA, it's the front court that makes the biggest impact. It's a unique situation. So
what do you want to happen? Let's start there before we talk about what you think will happen.
Yeah, so what I want to happen lines up pretty well with what I think is going to happen. So when they traded for Andre Drummond, I think there was an experiment aspect of this where they thought they were going to get 20 plus games of him with the young guys, see what that does for Garland, for Sexton, for Kevin Porter Jr. at the time, who were all good pick and roll players in college, but weren't playing pick and roll in the NBA because John Beilein wanted to do his kind of pretty dribble, handoff offense and all the stuff that makes you fawn over a coach, which just wasn't working. They were trying to do too many things. But obviously COVID struck. They didn't really get more than 8 games with Drummond. They tried to work out an extension prior to the season. They were too far apart on where they valued him. And once that happened, it was pretty clear, okay, they're going to try to flip him. Now,
can I just ask real quick, do you know what those, because didn't really read any reporting into specifics of what his camp wanted versus what you guys wanted to offer. Do you have any sense of what that was?
I think the Cavs were probably closer to 20 based on kind of reporting. Okay. 20 a year, maybe shorter term than he wanted, where he kind of wants to stay closer to where he's at. And I mean, him playing well now, like, let's be honest, I'd probably rather pay him than Gordon Hayward. at this point. Like when you're talking about that range of money, I don't think he'll go that high. I think he'll probably be closer to 25.
Okay.
But I think part of the thought too was like the Cavs, part of why they've been able to restock the cupboard is they've taken on bad money for assets. Like part of that, like they did the same thing when they took on John Henson, flipping George Hill, and they got the Bucks pick, which then turned into Jared Allen. John Henson, they flipped into Andre Drummond because Detroit didn't want to pay for another year and a half. And going into this free agency class, the thought was this is going to be a fantastic class. And not only can Drummond help you as a rental, he can clear up $28 million in cap space for a team. So there was a thought that there'd be value in that. Obviously, the class isn't as good as they anticipated, but Brian Windhorst has reported that there is a market out there for Andre Drummond. I know the Clippers have been mentioned. Kevin O'Connor mentioned the Mavericks and Raptors. So as long as like all they really gave for Andre Drummond was John Henson in a second. Now that you have Jared Allen, he wants to be in Cleveland long term. They're clearly going to find a big extension there for him. Flipping Drummond to get more long-term assets and maybe someone that can help you now, a backup center or backup point guard, which they need at this point. I think that would be a smart move that helps them both now and in the future.
At the risk of getting canceled by my own listeners, I have to ask, is there any pack? Because I don't think it's the right move for the Knicks. I just went on a rant about Mitchell Robinson because he sent out and then deleted a tweet the other day that I did not care for. We don't have to talk about it. But I think, Mitch still has a high upside. I believe in the upside. And also Obi Toppin, I think his future is going to, whether by hook or by crook, playing a lot of five, and he's going to have to figure out how to do that on the defensive end. So no, I don't want Andre Drummond, but I do think it's an interesting conversation just because I don't, like you said, what's going to be the market for him? Is it going to be cheap? Is there anything on the Knicks that you would want for Andre Drummond?
Frankie Smokes would excite me. I'd like to have him as a backup point guard. I'd like to get him in the mix there. I think he can help replicate what they were getting from Exum in the very few games that he was healthy. I really don't think there'd be too high of a price. Like I think if you could get Ntilikina, maybe some second round picks and salary filler, I'd be on board with that. I know the Cavs had some interest in Mitchell Robinson closer to draft night. I forget who had the report, but basically he was somewhat in the mix if they were trading back. Obviously, you don't have that kind of value where you're moving up from 8 to 5 like you would have on draft night. I think a lot of the Cavs, Obi Toppin smoke was trying to get that done with the Knicks, where they were just going with Okoro.
Smart move.
Yeah.
And good job by, I'll compliment Leanne Rose. Good job by Leanne Rose not jumping at that and trusting that Toppin would fall.
Yeah. I mean, it ended up working out for the Knicks. And I think Obi at 8, to speak to him just a little bit, like I think he's going to be a really polished offensive player. I think he's smart. I think he's a good passer. Defense, obviously a concern. But I do think, especially in this draft where there's not really a whole lot of cornerstone guys that were available, I think Obi at 8 is absolutely fine. I think Knicks fans will eventually learn to love him. But yeah, in terms of like a Drummond return, I wouldn't really be asking for the moon and the stars now if you could get Ntilikina and maybe another, like I would have to look at the salaries, but just the money work and a couple second round picks works for me.
If it's just about the money, it's, Ntilikina and Noel would be very close because
that's not bad.
We have 17 in cap space. He's making 20. It might come down to like a few $100,000. I'd have to look at the books on that. And we have a bunch of second round picks all of a sudden. Go figure.
Yeah. Drummond can go home, baby. Home to New York.
Yes, he could. It's
Tibbs would love him. Tibbs would absolutely love him.
Well, yeah, and it's like, but again, that gets into like the whole thing we started out the conversation with, which this line between like, okay, so winning helps development, right? And like being in games that matter help development and all that stuff. But what happens when the games that matter, Mitchell Robinson is now playing 15 minutes a game as opposed to 25 or 28 minutes a game? It's
that hurts. Yeah.
Yeah. it's so I'm curious to see what they're going to do, but maybe that has to do with their long-term opinion of Mitch. Couple more, and then I'm going to get you out of here. I have to ask about the decision because the decision is one of the most painful sports memories for me. Mm-hmm. And the guy never played for my team. Not for 1 second. And I had successfully talked myself into, of course he's going to come to New York. Why would he not come to New York? We're New York. We're the best. Right. This is how New Yorkers think, in case you were unclear. Is there still any lingering anything from that, or is the city pretty much over it?
So there are lingering parts to it. Like when he did come back, I was someone that was a little skeptical with the letter. I mean, it was kind of proven the skepticism, because after like a month or two in Cleveland, they had a below 500 record and he was already flirting with going back to Miami, and you got to make all these trades. So no, it's not just about coming home. And I think it was more about what the Cavs actually were able to accumulate in assets. Like Kyrie Irving was a big draw. The fact that they could trade for Kevin Love and had that deal lined up was a big draw for LeBron to come back. Like, I think people forget Kevin Love was supposed to be the number 2 and Kyrie was supposed to be the number 3 at that time. And it just worked out.
Goodness, you're right.
The other way. Because Love was talked about like a top 5 player. So getting that deal lined up was a big part of him coming back. Personally, the decision I've described as probably the best thing that's happened to me as a sports fan. Sucked, absolutely sucked. But after that, I learned to stop living and dying with the results of every single game. I managed to put things in a little bit better perspective. You go through the real crap years with the Cavs. For me, it also just kind of timing. I was in college at the time of the decision. Just learning, like, am I a Cavs fan or am I a LeBron fan? My allegiances stayed with the Cavs, and that's when I actually ended up getting involved with blogging at Fear the Sword, eventually starting the podcast, and I've really enjoyed the experience, and like it kind of forced me to grow up as a fan, and for that reason, it helped give me the perspective that I have now, right? Like where, I put into perspective that basketball is supposed to be fun. And that's one of the biggest things I do on my podcast, because there's so many, like, there shouldn't be a lane for someone like me, but there is, because so much of the coverage is everyone sucks except for 2 teams. No. Basketball's fun. It's about more than just winning championships. There's so much talent in the NBA right now. Even the non-playoff teams have so much young talent that's worth caring about, that's worth tuning in and figuring out what's going on with their development. And when you actually respect how much talent there is in the game, you don't feel as frustrated when your team loses, because you don't think there's only 2 good teams and how are we losing to all these bums. So for me, it's been a positive overall, even though it was obviously just one of the worst things at the time.
Yeah, I can't imagine it. Is he, this may sound like a silly question, is he your favorite Cav ever still?
Ooh, I think Kyrie overtook him. I don't have the allegiances I do now, but like Kyrie really, he came around just at the right time. Okay. And I think it was 2013. I have a now deleted tweet that I regret.
Everybody has those.
yeah. But I had a tweet basically saying, one, I predicted the Cavs would win a title in 2015 because I said that LeBron was going to come back because Kyrie's that good. And I also had a tweet that I said, all I want is for the Cavs to have Kyrie take a shot for the championship. I will live with the results one way or another.
Oh my God, that's great. That's beautiful.
And unfortunately, the injuries, like my personal opinion is both teams healthy, the results flip. The Cavs win in 2015, Warriors win in 2016, and I would have loved to see a rubber match, but I'm very happy with the way the results played out because it's more fun from a narrative standpoint.
I had my own personal issues with LeBron after the decision. Like a lot of the country just like was like, how could you do this and go there? And like something the night of the chase down, as it were, something happened that night where I'm like, okay, I respect him. It's cool. All sins forgiven. All right. Last one's a 2-parter. It's prediction time. So first we got to predict what happens on we're recording this on Thursday. So what happens tomorrow night, Friday game against these two teams in Madison Square Garden for the first time in the regular season, at least. And then second part of the prediction, which team do you think gets to, I'm not going to say like which team wins a championship first, but like which team do you think will be able to elevate themselves to even like semi-contender status first?
Okay, so I'm going to go Homer and pick the Cavs.
I was hoping you would.
I'm a little nervous with Larry Nance Jr. kind of being questionable, but you know, I'm hopeful that he'll be back. Who's going to be? See, I think the Cavs are going to be a playoff team next year. That's kind of been my prediction, that 27 wins this year, playoffs next year. Hopefully, get another young player in there. But I'm starting to wonder if they go through this February stretch where they're still 500. It wouldn't surprise me to, even though they're selling Drummond, for them to be kind of buyers at the deadline.
Is there a play? I'm throwing another one at you. Is there someone you want them to buy?
If they were able to clear the cap space, which isn't that difficult if Drummond's off the books, I would love to take a run at like a John Collins or Lauri Markkanen. Those are kind of the guys I have in mind. Like get a long-term four, because I really like Nance, but I think he's best as a third big off the bench. Just from a minute standpoint and managing the load, because he has had injury issues in the past. But like the core of Garland, Sexton, Okoro, and Jared Allen at the 5, you need to get a 4 in there. So getting an athletic 4 or a stretch 4 would go a really long way. So
that's all the hunt. Lauri or John Collins. I'm trying to think which one of those. I haven't been able to watch any of Markkanen this year, but like I remember, I'm still on the fumes of his rookie year, like a lot of us. So man, that's fun.
He's been good this year. Like John Collins, obviously, like the thing there would be Atlanta would not want to pay him. Like if they want to pay him and he's playing well this year, and like if I'm them, I'd pay John Collins. But if they don't, maybe there's a deal to be had there, either through restricted free agency, sign and trade, or whatever the case may be. I got I shouldn't say gently used, a very well broken in Kevin Love for them if they want. But if you're not paying John Collins, you're sure as hell not paying Kevin Love. I'm not full blown insane here. But yeah.
Poor Kevin Love.
Yeah, that would be the kind of thing I'd have in mind. Maybe a kind of buy low flyer on someone like Marvin Bagley. Like get a little more young talent in there, and see what can happen. So that would be the kind of deal that I would have in mind for them.
Okay, all right, but as it stands, you're cool with like the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th pick in the draft, and then hopefully get that next guy.
Hope for some lottery luck. If you don't get it, take whatever best small forward is there and kind of figure things out from there. Like it's a deep draft. Like obviously you want to be in the top 4. That would be ideal. Like I'd love Kid Cunningham or Kuminga or even Mobley. I think Mobley could potentially play the 4, kind of a la Chris Bosh in Toronto. But yeah, if you don't get there, like I think the most important thing is just the development of the guys that are currently on there, building that winning culture. And you know what? If you just, let's say you pick at 7 and all you get is a very good starter instead of a franchise cornerstone. If you have enough very good starters and you develop your young guys, you can trade. You can trade and consolidate that talent at a later date. So I don't think there's any one way to go about team building. But I do think that really focusing on developing a culture and that accountability is your most reliable way to improve yourself.
So this is why I was so excited to have you on. I love people who think about the game this way, because it's just like, there's so many, I don't know, there's so many disparate opinions. To me, this is like, if you're a Cavs fan, if you're a Knicks fan, I don't know how you watch this year and you're not excited about it. It's just nice to have a team where you could turn on and be like, they could win this game tonight. It might actually happen.
Here's the best way to think about the lottery odds. If you have the worst record, or I guess bottom 3 all has identical odds of getting in the top 4, 14% chance. That is the same likelihood of Andre Drummond hitting a 3-pointer when he was with the Pistons. And on top of that, don't you have like a 52% chance of falling to 5? Like that's more likely than Duncan Robinson or Steph Curry hitting a wide open 3-pointer. Think about that. Do you want to mortgage your entire season on Andre Drummond hitting a 3 over Steph Curry or Duncan Robinson or Kyle Korver or whoever you want to pick? Do you want to sacrifice the development of your own young talent for Andre Drummond 3-pointers? Keep that in mind.
That is a good way to end it on Andre Drummond threes. This really has been a lot of fun. I'm excited about this game. I have a feeling like the last two were, it's going to be a close one. Justin, could you just one more time let the folks at home know where they could find you?
Absolutely. So you can check out the Chase Down podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Support us there. Tell your friends. Leave ratings, reviews, all that good stuff. And you can find me on Twitter at Kazanada. Just take the Canada and slap Cavs in the front end. It looks a whole lot better in writing than it does out loud, but you can find my bad takes there.
You really need to give yourself more credit. You have good takes, man.